Thank you, Conrad.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk for about 20-25 minutes. In order to keep me on track, I've actually written my talk, and I'll be scrolling through it here because my printer doesn't work at the moment. So, in the publicity that I prepared for today's meeting, I don't know if it went out, I asserted that email is 50 years old, and I don't know exactly the date. That's based on the invention in 1971, let's see if the technology works, by programmer Ray Tomlinson of that company, who he was the first person to send a text from one computer to a user on a completely different computer. And he did that over the ARPANET, because BBN were doing a lot of work for ARPANET, and ARPANET has evolved now into the internet. He also pioneered the use of the commercial @ sign. Come on. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong computer.
We're all fairly familiar with this @ sign.
Yeah. Schnabel A, they call it in Swedish, A with an elephant's trunk. Now, the timeline is actually a bit murkier than that, because in the 1960s, users of the same computer, like, for example, there's PDP-11, multi-user computer, mini computer, they were already able to send each other messages from one terminal to another terminal that was attached to the same machine. And actually, that's the era of time sharing. So those users weren't necessarily sitting next to the computer; they could be at home miles away, and using a VT100 like this, or a piece of software that emulated a VT100, linked by a leased line or dialing in with a modem. And even earlier ways of sending text messages electronically, obviously there is Morse code, there's telex, and I once fell in love with a telex operator, so I know a bit how they work. When my dad got his Amstrad CPC, his first computer, the reason was because BT Telecom Gold had set up, and they offered a telex gateway, so he could sit at home and send a message to a telex, which would print it out in Singapore or wherever, because he was into import-export. My own introduction to something like email was much later. I think it was about 1991. There's a fax as well, just to remind you of it. I became a subscriber to something called the Manchester Host, which was an initiative set up by Manchester City Council and Manchester Polytechnic, and run by a small workers' co-op called PopTel. The system ran on a VAX, which is the successor to the PDP-11, a multi-user mini-computer, the successor to the, that's right. The VAX was a multi-user mini-computer, and it was the successor to the digital PDP-11, and this VAX couldn't hoover floors. If I wanted to send a message to another subscriber on the host, I would sit at my Macintosh, which would turn into a grim-looking VT100 terminal, because I was using terminal emulator software, and then I typed in, composed a message, but the software that was receiving the message and storing it and forwarding it was all on the VAX. Yeah? So it was really rather like the 1960s technique, store and forward. It was a bit clumsy and slow, and I learned to save money on telephone bills. That comes up next. By preparing messages in a text editor, copying, going onto the host, paste it, then get out of there before my telephone bill went through the roof. If memory serves, the text had to be chopped into lines 72 characters wide. Wouldn't accept more than that, it would just run off the screen. There was no wrap. And the only supported character set was this, what we call 7-bit ASCII. We couldn't, there wasn't even a pound sign, so we had to go GBP in order to indicate pounds. A lot of early email was restricted to 7-bit ASCII character set. Yes, we're looking at the 7-bit ASCII character set. It was also in a monospaced font. And there were tricks that you could do with a monospaced font. Like, for example, you could set a table just by pressing the spacebar. Oddly enough, I don't think I've encountered a modern email system that has a tab key.
I still get one of us.
Yes. Meanwhile, I was using PageMaker and Framemaker and other PageMaker tools, and I had access to all of those characters at the top. And as time has gone on, the fonts themselves have evolved into what are called Unicode fonts. And you can see, you can get some Vietnamese characters there, some Twi, some Icelandic, and some Thai. All of which I can type into my document. Okay.
You don't have the Cyrillic alphabet.
Sorry?
The Cyrillic alphabet, the Russian alphabet.
Yes, got Cyrillic, but my mum uses Cyrillic. Not long after, I got a sneak preview of the internet, which was at the time restricted to universities, but my friend on the Manchester Science Park had a back door into Manchester University because he used to work there. So I was dialing into his Sun workstation, scooting across to Manchester, down to Canterbury, out to the world. I have become an enthusiastic user of the document composition software Framemaker. But Framemaker is quite a complicated piece of software to run, and we needed to help each other around the world. It usually started with Headley Finger in Australia saying, "Help, how do I do this?" Then by the time it had gone all the way around the world, he might have his answer. Later, I joined two other email lists. One was they were about information design, the somewhat formal info design list, and then the more freewheeling info design cafe list. And today I'm involved with the Kidden list, which was started within the BCS. Now, if you've not experienced an email discussion list, here's a quick overview. I'll just leave that there. There's a machine somewhere that's permanently on the internet running list server software. For the info design, it was in the old Boers in Amsterdam. I've actually stood next to it. I could compose a message, send it to one email address, which is the email address of the list, and then it gets split out to everybody else.
Did you have any control over this, that you could limit numbers, or?
There's a system operator. You had to ask to join, and you could be thrown off if you misbehaved. In the case of Framers, I think there are about 1,000 of us. The software tends to be used by professional authors, journal editors, and technical writers. So the quality of the conversation was pretty high. The primary purpose for which Framers was founded was, as I say, so we could help each other if we got stuck. But some of the conversations also turned quite philosophical. And of course, there's always the, do you have two spaces after a full stop discussion, which comes up again and again. For me, participation in email lists and indeed direct internet emailing became much easier in, I think it was late 92 or 93. Because now the internet went commercial. You had firms being set up, ISPs in the jargon, internet service providers. The first one was Pipex, I think, in 1990. I became about the 6,000th demon customer, so I was one of the demons. And my email address was conrad@ideograph.demon.co.uk, which doesn't exist anymore. I think email lists are good, great, provided all the participants are pretty disciplined. The chap who ran he was our Framer system operator, would every couple of months remind us of the netiquette, the network etiquette, yeah? The things we shouldn't do. No rowdiness, please. No personal attacks, or as it was called, flaming. And do read the frequently asked questions list before you ask a stupid question, because it's already been around before. One of these behavioural norms has stuck with me to this day. If someone asked a question, it was courteous to just copy that bit of the message, the previous message, paste it in, marking it usually with indents like this one, like here. And delete the rest of the previous message. I wish more people would do that, because you get this situation where an email goes backwards and forwards and round the group, and each time someone just sees it on the screen and presses reply and sends back all of that stuff attached to it. Now, it just irritates me because I don't like scrolling up and down conversation streams to see what on earth are they talking about. But my friend Bob Bater emailed me just today, because I'd sent him this talk in advance for his assessment. He said the only thing that he would add is, if you do this sort of ping-pong, pressing the reply button, that's a whole lot of bits that have to be moved around. It takes energy, it takes up server space, and we can't complain that internet servers are causing climate change if we don't behave ourselves.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Because the trail of messages,
Yes.
in some professions, I thought, it would be quite useful to know who said what yesterday and who's saying this today. But when we learn from this, because you do that a bit when you email to me anyway.
Yes, it's you have to judge the circumstances and the circumstances of the person who's receiving the message as well. Now I'm going to move on to another internet revolution that happened around 1991. I call it email grows up, because up until that point you could only send text, and you could only send bit ASCII. Everyone, particularly around the BCS, everyone knows about Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web. Who's heard of these guys? No? In 1990, Nathaniel Borenstein worked for Bell Communications Research, and Ned Fried was building a small internet messaging company called InnoSoft. Fried was worried about what happened when messages went from one system to another system and then got screwed up. Borenstein was a bit more ambitious. He wanted to make email more exciting by sending pictures and richer text and maybe even video and other kinds of multimedia. Somebody who knew them both, they were on opposite coasts of the USA, put them in touch with each other, and by 1991 they'd come up with this proposal, MIME, the multi-purpose internet mail extensions. They took this to the Internet Engineering Task Force. IETF wasn't really interested in multimedia, but they were interested in internationalization, moving to 8-bit, having pound signs and accents and all that good stuff. And it actually happened that through a process of patient negotiation, ingenuity and revision, MIME became a draft standard in 1993, and it's still in draft standard. Still the same draft. But that doesn't matter because just about every email that's sent these days is encoded and organized using the MIME standard. Now, I'm not going to get technical, partly because I don't fully understand it myself, but the essential thing is that hidden in the background of the email, there's markup, and the markup says, look, this message is in several parts, this part's a picture and this part's plain text, and that's the boundary. There's a string here which is a boundary between the two blocks. And the other thing it says is, this block is, let's say, text, type, plain, and this bit is a binary file encoded in base 64. And the magic happens behind the scenes.
What's the difference now with HTML and ordinary text?
Well, a certain amount of MIME is used in HTML, in web page headers, to help sort. Yeah, am I right?
Don't worry, I'll back it later.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But the HTML has a completely different purpose. You know.
The body splits up into a number of sections.
Mm-hmm.
One of those sections can be content type HTML, that can be HTML or text, or it can be a
Oh,
picture.
that is true.
Yeah.
That's true because
the header
Because
is
you
not
can
in
choose.
HTML.
because you could send, yes, you could use MIME in order to send each web type email, like fully illustrate. You know, we all get these sort of advertising pages that have got pictures all over them.
But the MIME is usually on Apple. On PCs you don't have MIME. Or is that not true? Okay. Forget it.
All emails
It might be a different use of the word mime, I don't know, but
these days, the mail client is very often a web browser. And how did that happen? Well, this is the old web, right? This is static HTML. I still do that. I type HTML, I load it by file transfer protocol to my web server, and you can look at the pictures, you can move from page to page, but you can't interact with it any other way, really. You know? It's because I'm not clever enough. Now, the National Center for Supercomputer Applications in Illinois, NCSA, played a leading role in development of the World Wide Web, and in fact, the first widely distributed web browser with a graphical user interface was Mosaic. Anyone use Mosaic? No. One or two, yes. I still remember it. In those early years of the web, websites that were only minimally interactive, you could read the pages and you could click the links to get the new pages, but you couldn't write anything back to a website. Then, in 1993, NCSA wrote the specification for what is called the Common Gateway Interface, and I'm not going to get technical with this either, but it's thanks to CGI and standards that came from it that web servers are able to work together with a database or together with other software processes. So that makes it possible for you to do online shopping. It makes it possible for you to Google things and all that good stuff. In 1996, there were two chaps called Battier and Smith who they linked a database system and a web server, and they created Hotmail, which originally was spelled with a capital H, a T, an M, and an L. Yeah? You never knew that. The following year, they sold their company to Microsoft for a cool $400 million. That's the way to go. So that then became MSN Hotmail, and it's now kind of disintegrating into becoming Outlook. But there's still at least one person I know in this room who's got a Hotmail address, because they couldn't junk the old addresses. People wanted to keep them. Later on, Yahoo set up a web-based email service. Then Google got into the act, and by 2019, 1.5 billion people had a Gmail address. At least one. Gmail or Google Mail. It started out being called Google Mail. It's now kind of shrunk down to Gmail.
How many people are on Hotmail?
That I don't know.
Still a lot.
Ask Wikipedia.
I use it, so...
Yeah, you automatically are
Yeah.
going to...
No.
I will have to ask a question afterwards.
Yeah. What have we got next? Oh yeah. Some people prefer to use an email client on their computer. For many years, when I was with Demon Internet, I used some software called Eudora for the Mac. So all of my email was stored only on my machine. I was very diligent about organizing my email, always have been. Lots of folders and subfolders, and Eudora let you set up kind of auto filters, so if it came in from a particular address, it would go into that folder. It was quite easy to search through that mountain of mail. My friend Bob, who sent me the email last night, he works in a similar way using the open source email client Thunderbird, in his case on Windows. But one advantage of using web-based email is that your mail is all stored in the cloud, as they say, and you can access it from any internet-attached device, be it a computer, tablet, mobile phone, smartphone. Also remember that bad things can happen to good computers, and using the cloud as an email warehouse ensures you won't lose it. I think I've lost about 3 computers that way. I'm still carrying around the SSD from my late MacBook in the hope that maybe I'll be able to get an enclosure for it and rescue some of my stuff again. I'm getting quite used to Gmail these days. I've got 2 accounts, one of which is aliased to my own domain, conradiator.com, because I have a Google account. I've also adapted to the idea of using labels rather than folders as a way of organizing stuff. Yeah. One of the advantages of labels against folders is that folders, stuff can only go in one folder, but you can attach multiple labels, and you can see here there's a few there relating to my gardening expenses. Still haven't had the money yet. Now, to round off the story of the evolution of email, perhaps we should contemplate its decline and fall. I've put this down to about 3 sorts of factors, or you may think of others. Firstly, there's new kinds of device, but more significantly, there's a multiplicity of channels, and then there's a group of harder to define cultural factors, I would say. Obviously, the rise of the mobile phone and the smartphone has got to be a factor. Text messaging is about 2 decades old on SMS. WhatsApp is 12 years old. Whenever I travel by bus, I seem to be the only person not staring into a little screen. I'm looking out the window. As for other channels, I do confess I do a lot of Facebook. Keeps me in touch with friends all around the world. It's a sort of love it or hate it kind of piece of software, really. I like that one can easily share pictures with it. I belong to a Facebook group started about a year ago, and now Home Gardening Ghana has 186,000 members. And people are always doing things like, see what I've grown this week, or another one is posting a picture of some fruit or fungus and saying, please, is this edible? And on 2 occasions I've been tempted to reply, everything is edible, at least once. There are other channels, including Snapchat and Instagram. I've got no experience with them. Perhaps some of you are and can share it. I understand they're popular with young people. As for the cultural factors, perhaps we can explore those in discussion. I notice there's a trend to what we might call short-form messaging and on-the-fly conversations. Personally, I've always liked writing. And I enjoy composing emails too. And the same is true of my mum. We don't use the phone, but we swap emails several times a week. Sometimes several a day. Email, good or bad? Well, one frequent complaint about email is that there's just too damn much of it. And I think that's particularly in an office context or an organisational context. Yeah. And there's one thing that quite commonly happens, which is somebody's writing to a particular person, but they decide to copy in their colleagues. And so it just sort of takes over the world. And then there's the problem of spam and unwanted commercial or even worse messages. Though I reckon that Gmail, because it's based on a search technology engine, is pretty good at spam filtering. Hardly ever any comes through to me. Once or twice, something that isn't spam falls into the spam bucket. I always forget to check that. I like that an email system offers a kind of an audit trail, and a searchable one at that. I run a community garden project at the temporary accommodation hostel I live in, and when I was told that Lambeth Council would pay for the items I bought for the project this year, I was able to use a combination of Google search and my shop and garden labels, and then just go through them to find the order confirmation emails that I've been sent regarding online shopping. Mostly Amazon, but also Sutton, Seeds, and so on. So I made screenshots like this of an order confirmation email, which is quite richly formatted from Amazon. Put them in a PDF document and sent to Lambeth. It came to £566.72, and I'm hoping to have it soon, please. One group which does seem to be shunning email in favour of WhatsApp and Signal is Tory ministers and lobbyists. Yeah? There's an article here about this. The messages can be encrypted and they can be set to be permanently deleted from the platform after a certain number of days. So, bang goes government accountability. You know? There's no record kept of the scheming. This Guardian article, self-destructing messages are undemocratic, say transparency campaigners preparing judicial review. And that's a short-form URL, which I can give you later if you want to follow up that story. If you click on there, it will take you through to the really long URL. on Guardian. Do you want to, are you noting it down, Andrew? Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Oh. I'll think of it.
Okay, right, later. Attachments and detachments. That was the other thing that mine brought us, was that we could attach files to email. So there's things like images, can be in JPEG, GIF, PNG, word processing. I'm using LibreOffice, I don't use Word, but you can send a Word file, obviously. Audio files, MP3, AAC. Complex documents with PDF, I love PDF. I was actually there when it was born. File archives like zip. No, not pizza. The file format hasn't been invented yet. Probably a good idea. You know, you can. In any case, the pizza that they could send would probably only be 5 1/4. 1993 was quite a year. I've mentioned it was the year email got a boost with the adoption of MIME. It was also when the World Wide Web got more traction, and when NCSA released Mosaic. And 1993 also saw Adobe release Acrobat and the portable document format. I used to attend the CBOL conference on electronic publishing in San Francisco in those days. And it was way cool to hang out with people like John Warnick, the inventor of PDF, and other luminaries of electronic publishing. I also remember that because after San Francisco, I flew down to Los Angeles and got caught up in the Eaton Canyon wildfire at my friend Charmaine's house burnt down. We became refugees in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Pasadena. MIME made it possible for me to attach PDF to emails, and what's great about PDF is that it freezes the layout and bundles up the fonts and compresses the images in my document. But sometimes, even with my 5G connection and the generally more generous size of people's mailboxes, I need to turn to another way of moving files around. As I say, I've got a Google account, and I have a Google Drive facility, and I just email someone the link, give them the permissions on my site, and then they can get it. Thus, email for me, my last words on this, email lives in a communications ecosystem. It's part of the mix. But for me, it's a pretty important part. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now the discussion can begin. Are you going to run it?